mincha shalas rainim, but he didn't say how many. Tanu Rabannan, pirashti. Let's look at the Bach. Pirashti mincha shalas rainim, and he sticks into something very important. V'kavati bechli, and I was keveya that the amount of esronim that I bring, it'll all be bechli echad. So they all have to be brought in one keli, but ve'eni yodeya ma pirashti. But I don't know how many esronim I designated or I obliged myself to bring in this one keli. So the halach is yavi mincha shel shishim esronim derech chachamim. Worst case scenario is it was 60. So then that's how many esronim you have to include in this single keli mincha. But Rebbi Omer, that wouldn't work. You'll have to yavoi menachos shel esronim me'echad v'atshishim shehin elef u'shmoinim me'os u'shloshim. That's 1830. Why must he do that? Because he holds that you can't put more in than is necessary. So if you said 30, you can't put in 31. You have to put in exactly 30. Therefore, there has to be a mincha that's exactly 30. But there also has to be a mincha that's exactly 31, exactly 1, exactly 2. And that's where this comes from. So here, Rashi, Tosfos actually gives us the logic behind the formula. Because the formula is whenever you have an increasing amount, similar to this or similar to Neres Chanukah, you take the largest amount, which is 60, you divide it by 2, and you get 30, and you multiply it by 1 more than the total by 61. That's how you get 30. So where does that come from? So actually, Tosfos breaks the formula down. Shein elef u'shmoinim me'os u'shloshim ketzad. Kach b'yotcha, take a list of numbers in your hand, me'echad v'atshishim, from 1 until 60. And v'tzirif tchilos and l'soifan. Add the lowest number to the highest number. So 1 to 60. 2 to 59. You're going to have the same sum by every equation. It'll be 61. You know how many sets of 61 you're going to end up having? You're going to have 30. Kohen echad v'shishim, hem samachalev. Shnayim v'nun tes, hem samachalev. V'sholosh v'nun ches, hem samachalev. Kain timna at shloishim. You'll count that until you get to 30, and 30 will be meshudach with shloishim v'echad. Nami hem samachalev. V'yalaloch. And at the end of the day, you're going to find that you have 30 equations that all add up to 61. Shloshim pamim samachalev. V'chei nuchalimnois parim dechag. Now that we've figured out this formula, we can use it to figure out the total amount of parim that are brought on sukkahs. The oilim l'shivim, it adds up to 70. Ketzad, zayin v'yud gimel, because on the first day I think it was yud gimel, on the last day it was zayin. So you take Zayin and Yud Gimel, Hemeshim, V'chein Ches V'yud Beis, Hemeshim, V'chein Tes V'yud Aleph, Hemchof, V'yud Harei Shivim. So all you do is you take the lowest number, you take the highest number, and you take the lowest number, the highest number, you take the halfway mark, and then you multiply it by 1 higher than the highest number. And that will be your sum total. Okay.
Say that part.
What part?
Multiplying it by the 1 higher.
Well, what you do is because Tosfos doesn't give you a formula. He just take the matches. By the time you take the matches, that's what you're going to get. Okay. When you're dealing with a number that doesn't start at 0, so that part doesn't work out. Okay. So let's see what the Gemara says. So that is the sheet of Rebbi. You have to have one of each. Zog to Gemara weiter. What if he said pirashti, ve'eni yodeya ma pirashti, ve'ezu mehem pirashti, ve'eni yodeya kama pirashti. So here we have a little bit of a redundancy, and they take out the first shtickle. So pirashti, ve'eni yodeya ezoi pirashti, ve'eni yodeya kama pirashti. So now he has a double layer of confusion, because not only does he not know if he obliged himself to any number between 1 and 60, but he also doesn't know what type of mincha he obliged himself to. So now it's 60 times 5. Yavi chamesh menachos shel shishim esroinim shehein shalosh shemayos divrei chachamim. According to the chachamim, you have to bring a mincha of 60, right? If you didn't know what the number was between 1 and 60, you got to bring 60. But now you got to do that 5 times, one for each type of mincha. So machvas, mercheshes, soiles, mafitaner rechikin, and mafitaner chalis. And that's just according to the Chachamim, according to Reb Shimon, there's many more variations, which is what we discussed yesterday. Rebbi Omer, it's even worse. It's 1830 times 5. Yavi chamish menachos shel shishim esroinim v'echad b'chishim. So 1830 times 5, shein tisha alofim umeya v'chamishim. That's 9,150 menachos. So what is the reason for Rebbe why he says you have to bring a series of menachos 1 through 60? Amar B'chista, the machlokes is about the mutter lahachnes chulin lazar kamivli. Now, as a hakdama, everybody agrees that you're not allowed to be maktir a minchas choiva and a minchas nedava in one keli. So therefore, you're not allowed to put. Let's say if we're talking about 60, which is our case, if the suffix is up to 60, they're abundant hold, you put them all into one keli, in whichever number of Israelis you originally obliged yourself for will be your chayva, will be your neder, and everything remaining will be nedava. You can't do that, because now you have neder and nedava in one keli. You can't do it at all. But you know what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to say, whatever I said, that's the number. Let's say 32 is the number, and the remaining are chulin. So now you have chulin in your mincha that you're being makter in the Beis Hamikdash, and that's what the machlokes is. But my kamivli amar b'chista b'muter lahachnes chulin lazar kamivli. There's a machlokes whether or not you're allowed to bring in chulin lazar. Here you're bringing in the extra part of the mincha lazar. The kaimitz is still the same because it's only one kaimitz you're putting on the mizbeach, but you're bringing in more shirayim than you were supposed to. Rebbe said we're also lahachnes chulin lazar, and therefore you have to bring the series of menachos from 1 through 60. For Rabannan Chavi muter lahachnes chulin lazar, so you just make it nigh whatever is supposed to be to fulfill my nether will be there, and the remaining is chulin. Rava Amar the chulin alma osar lahachnes chulin lazar. Rava wanted to suggest another pshat in the machlokes Rebbe and the Chachamim, where everybody else is osar lahachnes chulin lazar. So then we understand Rebbe. But how do we understand the Rabannan? It goes back to the first shaila that we mentioned. Can you mix in one bowl, in one mincha? Part of it will be chayva, because that was what you were makabel upon yourself. That was your nether. And part of it will be nedava. Rabannan Savri muter la'arav chayva b'nedava. And therefore, you have one big bowl with 60 in it. Whatever is part of my nether will be my nether. The rest will be nedava. Rebbe Savar Asr la'arav chayva b'nedava. Amr le'abayil l'rava. Le'Rabannan Arbi muter la'arav chayva b'nedava. Even if you hold, you could mix chayva b'nedava. We still have an additional problem, because then habe'inon shnei kmotzim. If half of it was chulin, so that the chulin part doesn't need a kmitza. But if the other half was l'nedava, where is your kmitza for the nedava section? So it's not a problem. You actually have to make 2 kmitzas. The kamitz v'hadir, the kamatz v'hadir kamitz. You make 2 kamitzas. Now, which one do you do first? I don't think it's going to matter, but we'll see what happens. The Gemara is going to explain that it does matter. The kamitz v'hadir kamitz. Freit the Gemara, but the problem is, when you're making a kamitza from one big mixture, how do you know to identify that every part of your kamitza was only part of what we determine is going to be your nether? V'aka kamitz me'chayva nedava u'menedava chayva. Zok to Gemara, the Talile B'das Koyin. He has another Kiddush to Geshita that the Koyin's das, when he's making that Kmitza, determines what that Kmitza is going to be earmarked for. I'm sorry?
Brera?
It's not Brera, because it gives the Koyin a Koyach to determine what he wants it to be for. The Makal Heicha, the Mata Yad the Koyin, Hashta Chayva. He determines that whatever I'm taking now is designated now as the chayva. So he has the right to, right now, before he touches anything, we don't know what part is of this mincha is chayva, what part is nedava. But if he makes a kmitza, he can say, I want to designate that whatever I'm taking out of my hand, that should be from the chayva. So it's not prayer. He could be doing it right now. Prayer means he's clarifying today what occurred yesterday. Here he's actually creating that reality right now. So Zoktamar, since he also told him das koyin davar kalecha the mati yod lekoyin hashta chayva l'b'soif nedava. So at least it solves the problem. It still solves the problem of the kmitza. Let's just see Rashi kalecha the mati yod lekoyin hashta bekoyin mitrisha and yechayva v'kalecha the mati yod bekoyin mitzachin tein. So he's actually designating it at that point in time. Okay, so now you have two kmitzas, but now you have another problem. Heichi makterli. How are you going to be marked to these kmitzas? Dilma kula chayvahi v'chosru lo shirayim. Let's say the whole mincha was really chayva, because let's say what he originally said was 60. So now he took the first kmitza out. The second kmitza was for nothing, because there is no nidava here. Because it turns out that all 60 was the chayva. If that's the case, now you have a mincha from where you took a smicha, you took a smicha, you took a kmitza. You have a mincha from where you took a kmitza, and
why would he call it chayva?
Because let's say he said 60. Let's say that was his original. That was his original nether. It was 60, right? That's why he brings 60, because it could have been 60, but it could be any number between 1 and 60. Let's say that was the number. It was 60. So now what did he do? He has a mincha. He took a kmitza from it, it's fair and square. Now the rest of the mincha has to be given to the kahanim. What did he do? He took now another kmitza out of what was supposed to go to the kahanim. Now we have a big problem, because the Amar Mar said, Shirayim shechosru ben kmitza l'aktara. If you make a kmitza that's a perfect kmitza, but then before you put your kmitza on the mizbeach, you now took more away. In this case, because you made a second kmitza, ein maktir kaimitz aleim. You can't be maktir. So you're stuck again. You can't fulfill any of your chiyuvim, because on the tzad that there's kula in the neder, there is no nedava. After the kmitza that you took for the neder, you've taken away some of the shirayim, and therefore you're no longer able to be maktir the original kmitza. Zok to Gemara, likter choiva bereisha. Let's say you're maktir the choiva bereisha. So if you're maktir the choiva bereisha, even before he took the first kmitza, so then you're not going to have a problem, because it's not the shirayim were in chaser at the point that he did the haktar of the kaimis. But then the nedava hechi maktirli. How could you be maktir the one of nedava? It might not even be. It might be nothing. You might be taking part of the shirayim and you're putting it on the mizbeach. Zok to Gemara, v'dilma chayvahi. Maybe the whole thing was the chayva, and that second kmitza is not supposed to be put on the mizbeach. And there's a lav. There is a lav to give more to the mizbeach than the amount that the mizbeach is supposed to have. And it's referred to as b'chol shahu mimenu le'ishim harei b'al taktiru. Once you've already presented the part of the mincha that has to be placed on the mizbeach, meaning the first kmitza, there's an Israel lav to be maktir a second kmitza, because we actually have this limud. It says so that pasuk is prohibiting the placement of sa'ar and devash on the mizbeach. The problem is we already know from a different pasuk that you cannot place sa'ar and devash on the mizbeach. So we dashin l'shekteru mimenu ishel Hashem, any carbon where you were already maktir, what you were supposed to be maktir, you're not allowed to be maktir more. This is a prime example. You were already maktir the kmitza for this mincha, which was all it needed, because it turns out that his original obligation was for 60. Now, by putting the second kmitza on the mizbeach to fulfill just in case it's to the dava, he's putting on the mizbeach a second kmitza. That's an Isra lav. When is it osir to put a second kmitza on the mizbeach? That's only if you're putting it l'shem the mizbeach, l'shem carbon. But what if you're just putting it on to be fuel? You're not putting it on with the das of being maktir. So Eliezer, and this is a chiddush that Rabbi Eliezer taught us. The Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Aimer. Just look at the Bach. The El HaMizbech lo yalu l'reach nichoyach. So we dash in l'reach nichoyach iatamala avul atamala l'shum eitzim. You're allowed to bring it up l'shum eitzim. You could say that I'm not making this committee that I'm placing on the Mizbech on the tzad that it was the nether was all 60, and this second committee does not belong on the Mizbech. I'm not putting it on the Mizbech as a committee to be makter in itself. I'm putting it on the Mizbech so there's more fuel to burn other things that will place on the Mizbech. Well, here he's making it into wood. He's designating it as firewood. So Rashi says he's makir the chayva b'reisha of the nether. With the kamar dilma, ain't shiraim ninu. It's not shiraim. I'm sorry, dilma ain't shiraim ninu. V'kamu ulu b'bal taktiru. The makir the kaimitz the double shemaitim. So what he does is he says that on the tzad that this kmitza it was not necessary because the first kmitza was for the whole mincha. This should be eitzim, and that's a loophole that exists. Amr le Rab Acha b'rei de Rav le Ravashi, but we still have another problem. The dilma the chula alma muter la'arav chayva b'nidava. Maybe everybody holds you could be ma'arav chayva b'nidava, but remember after we said suggested that should be the machlekes, we had several hoops that we had to jump through. How do you take the kmitza? How do you put it on the mizbeach? And we had to rely on the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, as we just did, to allow him to put the second kmitza on the mizbeach, just in case his nether was for all 60. So let's say that's what the machlekes is about. Maybe everybody else muter la'arif chayiv b'nedafa. The whole issue here is how can you put the second kmitza on the mizbeach? The Rabannan is the Rabbi Eliezer. The Rabannan holds you could put the kmitza, the second kmitza on the mizbeach l'shem eitzim, and therefore they hold you only have to bring one big mincha with 60, and we'll be able to solve the suffix with that. But for Rebbi Leslie, the Rebbe Eliezer, Rebbi didn't like what Rebbe Eliezer said, like Duvi. How could you make that into eitzim? Right? It doesn't work. And therefore, you wouldn't be able to do it. And therefore, you have to bring 60 menachos. Amr lei. So he told him back. So Rav Acha told us to Rav Acha said this to Rabashi. So Rabashi responded to Rav Acha, Isol kadaitach l'Rebbi muter la'arav chayve b'nedava. If you're going to want to explain Rebbi as saying that it's a muter la'arav chayve b'nedava, and the whole problem is uder Rabbi Eliezer Leslie, I have a way around it. So you cannot say that's the machlokes, because just because you don't have Rabbi Eliezer, I could solve the problem of how you put that second kmitza onto the mizbeach. I could solve it with a different loophole. And what could you do? After the maisi shitin bechad mana, bring a mincha of 60 in one keli, and you say whatever part of it is nether, the rest is nadava, and do the second kmitza, but don't do the second kmitza from that very same keli. And then you have a problem of mimenu leishim. You already makter one kaimitz of that keli. Rather, bring another keli, the chad bechad mana. Get one extra yisaron, which will be now 61 yisaron total, and put that one yisaron into a separate keli as a separate standalone mincha. And when you make the kmitza, umagalahu, make the two touch together, the kamitz. But you're taking the kmitza out of the second keli. The second keli could be a standalone mincha where there was never a mimenu leishim. But just in case there is some nidava in the first keli, because his original obligation wasn't 60, it was less, the fact that they're touching when he makes the kmitza will allow the kmitza from keli number 2 to cover all those isroidish that are in keli number 1 that might be nidava. So therefore, you cannot suggest that the machlokes is all about Rebbe Eliezer, but everybody agrees muter la'arev chayva b'nedava, because if that was the case, then Rebbe wouldn't have had to require so many menachos. Rav Amar duchula alma muter la'arev chayva b'nedava. Let's say everybody agrees it's muter la'arev chayva b'nedava, and duchula alma islu Rebbe Eliezer, and everybody holds like Rebbe Eliezer. So then, why in the world did Rebbe require so many menachos? The machlokes here, whether or not this method could have worked, will be totally in a chiddush that we learned from Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, which is it's not we learned. Afilu mincha shel samach isaron noisen law samach loig. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer afilu mincha shel shishim isarim Ein la ela loiga. There is a machlokes. We know that a standard mincha has a nisar and silas and one loig of shemen. What if you decided to make a bigger mincha, 60 isronis, like we have in our case? How many loig of shemen do you put in? Does that mean you have to double up on the oil and keep it with the same ratio and use 60 loig, or only one loig? If you hold you have to do 60 loig, so then if you split the mincha, or half will be choiva and half will be nidava, there's no problem because the ratio of oil to flour is equal throughout this entire batch. So whatever is nadava, whatever is nether. But what if the halacha is no matter how many Yisroinim in your nether, you have to have only one loig. So now you have 60 Yisroinis of flour, and you have one loig of shemen, right? Let's say my nether was 30. So now that loig shemen is supposed to be exclusively for my nether. Where's the oil for the nedava? So that's not going to work anymore. So Zog to Gemara, they're arguing in the machlokes if it's one loig per mincha or if it's one loig per isarin. That's not afilu mincha shel samach isarin noisen law samach loig. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer afilu mincha shel shisim isarim ein la elaluga shenemar lemincha. We actually had these lemudim earlier in the Masechta. It says lemincha veloig shemen. So since the word mincha precedes the word loig shemen, we learned that it's only one loig shemen per the entire mincha, which is how Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov learned. For Rabannan Savik Rabannan, the Amri Samach loig, you have one loig shemen for every yisarin, and since you have one loig shemen for every yisarin, so the ratio of oil to flour will be consistent throughout. V'chachad v'chad yisarin lugo kashakal, and therefore whichever ends up being neder has its proper amount of oil, and whichever amount was the nedava will have its proper amount of oil. Rebbi Savar Rebbi Elazar ben Yaakov, the Amar Ein Lo Ela Loiga. Rebbi's going to hold that you only put in one loig shemen, even though there's going to be 60 Yisraelis, and we don't know how many of these 60 are nether and how many are nedava. V'lo yadina nichada minchahi. If it's all one mincha because his original nether was 60, then it's perfect. The sagi lo b'chad look. But the problem is, ishtei menachos ninu. You'll need the beinin shnei loigin. I'll need a second loig for the second mincha, which I'm not putting in here. So that could be what the machlokes is about. Rav Ashi Amar, the machlokes could be about something else. Bekatan v'hevi gadol kimhevili. Everybody holds that you can't mix neder and dava. Everybody holds you can't mix chulun with carbon. Here the question merely is: let's say I said a mincha von loig. Would it be a problem to give a mincha of 60 loig? Will that fulfill my nether? That's what the whole machlokes is about. Much simpler machlokes. The cotton vevi gadol kamivli. Rabannan savri cotton vevi gadol yatsa. No matter what I said, any number between 1 and 60, 60 will cover for me because bichlal masayim mana. But for Rebbi Savar lo yatsa, Rebbi holds if you say 30, it's 30. If you say 10, it's 10. Putting more into the same keli will not fulfill your nether. Frek the Gemara. So our Mishnah over here, that's where this machlokes was introduced to me as to whether or not you're allowed to give bigger and better than what you promised. We already heard this machlokes elsewhere. Why do I need our Mishnah here in Menachos to teach us this machlokes? There already is such a machlokes. The Tanan we learned by a behema, if someone said, Harei alai shalomim, but a small little sheep. Harei alai cotton. Behevi gadol, and instead he brought an ox. So now it's the same shaila. He gave a lot more than he promised. So Rashi's cotton behevi gadol, shar cotton, alai. He said, I changed it to a different animal. Shar cotton, I'll bring a small ox, behevi gadol, and instead he brought a very big ox. So there's such a machlokes. Rebbi Omer lo yotza, because Rebbi holds you can't give bigger. Cotton vevi gadol doesn't work. So Dr. Tricha, I need to have learned this machlokes sai by behemoths and sai by a mincha. Why? The itmar baha, if if we only knew the halacha by the case of the mincha. But ha'ka'ami Rabannan mishum the idi v'idi kaivetzu. Why does it make a difference to the Beis Hamikdash how many Yisroinis are in the mincha? At the end of the day, the mizbech still gets the exact same matana. The mizbech gets the one kaimetz. Aval hasan by a behema, where you're being back to a murim, if it's a bigger behema, there's a lot more meat that's going to be placed on the mizbeach. Aval hasan the kanafishi a murin, Rebbi, maybe he's demoted to Rebbi because he's not giving exactly what he promised. He's giving a bigger heart, or a bigger emurim, wherever the emurim are, he's giving it bigger. But by the mincha, he's giving exactly the same amount. The itmar bahi, and if we only knew the halacha by the meat, bahi kama Rebbi, that's what Rebbi said that you can't go bigger because it's not the same matana. Avul by the mincha. Because anyway, it's the same amount that's being placed on the mizbeach. Zogt the Gemara Tzricha. Zogt the Heilige Mishnah weiter. Hooray! So let's just do a quick chazar because we don't have time, but we'll do a quick chazar. There were many different options for what the machloikis was between Rebbi and Rabban. It could have been that it's, no one's making the other half into an adava. The other half will be chulin. The question is, could you have chulin mixed into this mincha and it'll be chulin lazar? Right, that was one option. Then was the options: could you mix nether with nadava, and you had to make the t'nai, whatever wasn't for your nether would be part of the nadava. And then we had to deal with how you could make the kmitza and how you could put the kmitza on the mizbech, and why is there a problem with shirayim, which was impacted by Rabbi Lazar, who holds that if you're giving it la'etzim, you won't have the problem of putting on the second kmitza. And then we said also will do very much this whole thing will depend on whether or not you're supposed to just put in one like shemen or multiple like shemen. Okay, Zok the Gemara weiter. Zok the Mishnah. Harei ola eitzim. If someone promised a donation of wood, what is the minimum that he has to give? Lo yivchos mishnei gezirin. You have to give two shnei bekois gedolos, two large cords of wood. No, cord is a much bigger amount. Two logs. Levoina. What if he said, I'm going to give levoina? Lo yivchos mikoimetz. He has to give a koimetz of levoina. What if there are 5 servings of a koimetz that you find relevant to the karbanos? Number 1, ha'omer alai levoina, the case of our Mishnah, lo yivchos mikoimetz. But there's another case where a koimetz is relevant. Hamisnad of mincha. Whenever you give a mincha, yavi ima koimetz levoina. You're obliged to also bring as part of the mincha a koimetz levoina. Then we have halacha ha'mailis ha'koimetz b'chutz. Chayiv. There's something called shchutei chutz. If you're makter a carbon b'chutz, you're chayiv koros. How much of the koimetz, how much of the mincha would you have to be mala b'chutz? It would have to be a koimetz because that is what's called halal b'chutz. Okay, shnei bazichem tu'unin shnei kamatzim. By the lechem aponim, they are 2 bazicha levaina, and the koimetz of each one has to be placed on the mizbeach. Okay, harei alai zahav. What if someone says, I'm accepting upon myself to give gold? How much gold do you have to give to the mizbeach? Lo yivchos medinar zahav. He has to give at least 1 dinar. Kesef. What if he said harei alai kesef? Lo yivchos medinar. What if he said lo yivchos medinar kesef? What if he said nechoshes? I'm going to give copper. There it's lo yivchos mima kosef. A ma kosef is an amount of value. You have to give as much copper that it would match the value of a ma kosef. What if he said pirashti ve'en yidei ma pirashti? What if he says I promised to give gold, but I don't remember how much gold? So now it could be unlimited. So the halach is maybe he has to give enough gold till he's sure. There's no way I meant over $1 million. Up to $1 million I could have considered, but there's no way that's conceivable that I would have ever obliged myself to give more than $1 million. He hasn't been to a Tosh Rebbe. They used to say that when the Tosh Rebbe asked you for money, no matter how wealthy you are, it felt like a gut punch. Zok to Gemara, Tanu Rabannan, Carbon, Malamed shemisnadvin eitzim. So what does the pasuk say? It's an extra word. It says v'nefesh kisarvin korban minchal Hashem. From the word korban, that's extra teaches that you could be not of eitzim. The kamo, how much is it? Shnei gzirin. The chenu oimer, that this v'chenu oimer is not proving that it's shnei gzirim. This v'chenu oimer is only bringing another pasuk to support the fact that you could donate wood. It says v'agayrolos yipalnu al korban eitzim. Rebbi oimer eitzim korbanim. If you're bringing eitzim, it's not fuel. If you say, are we allowed to bring eitzim, it's not fuel. It's actually a carbon that's called carbon eitzim. Rebbi Yomer eitzim carbonate, and therefore tun and melech, just like every other carbon has to be salted, you'd have to salt this wood. Tun in hagosha, and just like a mincha, you bring the whole mincha to the south eastern tip of the mizbeach, southwestern tip of the mizbeach. So too by the carbon eitzim, we treat it like a regular carbon mincha. Because the word carbon that we learned eitzim from is in the parsha of carbon mincha. And according to Rebbi, holds it's a carbon eitzim to unen kemitza. You'd have to make a kemitza on it. So the way you would do it is you would put it through a grinder, and you would make the wood into sawdust or into wood chips, and then you could make a kemitza from it. Amar Papa l'divrei Rebbi eitzim trichan eitzim. According to Rebbi, that eitzim is a carbon. You'd have to bring eitzim with it to burn the eitzim. Zok Gemara, Levaino lo yivchos mina koimetz. Minalan tichsiv herim mimenu bikumtzai. Misailas hamincha umishamna. So this is talking about a regular mincha. So it says with the koimetz that you make of the flour and the oil, you also have to herim bikumtzai misailas hamincha umishamna, and then veskala levaino. The veskala levaino means similar to the amount that we took from the Silas HaMincha. Magish Levaina Laharama de Mincha. We compared the amount required of Levaina to the amount required for the Kemitz of the Mincha. Ma Rama, the Mincha Kaimetz, Af Levaina Namai Kaimetz. Tan Rabannan. Hare Alai La Mizbeach. He said a very general term. Hare Alai La Mizbeach. I'm accepting upon me to give to the Mizbeach. There could be an unlimited amount of karbanos that you could be mechayiv yourself. But what did he say? La mizbeach. I'm giving a carbon that all of it, every little drop of what I'm going to give is going to be burnt on the mizbeach. There is only one carbon that every bit of it goes on the mizbeach, and that's levaina. Yavi levaina she'ein loch davar shekarav legab mizbeach ela levaina. What if he said pirashti ve'ein yodea ma pirashti? Now here Rashi says if he said arei alayla mizbeach, then that means levaina. But if you said, Rashi, Echod me'oisan hakraven kulan lemizbeach. What if he said, I know I promised one of the items that's yikrav kulan lemizbeach. So you'll ask yourself, what do you mean one of the items? There's only one option, levaina. Zok Rashi, if someone says I was mechayiv myself to one of the items that are included on the mizbeach, obviously in his mind he's not referring to levaina. He's referring to a broader set of items that also most of it is put on the mizbeach. So therefore, by definition, his chayvus encompassed more than just levaina. So then yavi mikol davar shekarav lemizbeach. He has to bring from anything that's karav lemizbeach. What are those things? It could be levaina, but if you look at the Rabbeinu Gershom, he also says it could be other things as well. It could be referring to, it's further down over here. Could be referring to other things, he says. Could be referring to eitzim, I think he says. This is maybe it's on the next page. It's somewhere. I will confess that the art scroll actually quotes him, but I did look it up inside to see where he says it. So I always like looking up inside. But the art scroll quotes him that it could be referring to to eitzim or some other things. Oh, here it is. I think. Yavi levaina dezel davar shekulam mizbeach. Pirashi v'nidea, he says over here, let's see where he says it over here. Oh, here it is, yeah. V'akol doch and the levina v'oilo nesachim. Right. So that's what the Art Scroll is referring to. So he meant a little bit more broad, but still not very broad category. So Zok to Gemara weiter. Yavi v'chaldov v'shakar v'mzbech. V'suleka, are there no other items that are kula l'mzbech going back on levina? But ika oila. What about a carbon oil? The whole animal is burnt. So that's kula l'mzbech. Zok to Gemara, ika oira l'kayanim. The hide goes to the kayanim. Frank Gemara, ika oila saif. There's oila saif where the whole thing goes on his back, and not one part of it goes to the kohen. So true, not one part goes to the kohen, but not the entire bird goes on the mizbech. Ika murav that the kohen ripped out that and threw it away. What about the nesachim? That when you're makdish nesachim, you just pour that fully on the mizbech. So you're right, but lashita nasli, they don't stay on the mizbech and cook on the mizbech. They just drain down into the drain. The minchas nesachim we said is kula the mizbech. You don't take a kmitza from it. Zaktamar true, but kivan the ika mincha the achli kahanim, since there's another type of mincha that the kahanim do get a chelik, leipsikala, he for sure wouldn't have that in mind when he said kula the mizbech. He would not likely have been referring to a minchas nesachim because the category of mincha is not kula mizbech. So that's how we know he meant for sure baziche lavoina. Okay, we'll stop here. Bez Hashem, we'll be back tomorrow.